get started. Hello, everyone. A very happy new year to you. This is the first of the 2022 webinar series that is presented by My Family Services. So welcome. And it's on a very relevant topic about raising children in the age of advanced technologies and social media, which is the primary cause of plenty of issues and worries that has been going on. So I'll hand it over now to Anu and to start the entire process. Go ahead, Anu.
Thank you, Vatsala. Good afternoon, all, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of My Family Services, I welcome each of you to this very intriguing and critical discussion around children and advanced technologies. My Family Services is a non-profit organization serving South Asian families in abuse and crisis by providing prevention and interventional support since 1986. You can visit us at www.maifs.org. So let's dive right into it. You hand a smartphone or a tablet or any tech device to even a toddler. Chances are they're going to figure out how to open it and maybe even make some in-app purchases in a matter of seconds. Well, the technological boom that you see means that children are becoming computer experts at a very, very young, impressionable age. Elementary school students have classes on computers, and many of them have been using their computers even before they started school. So as kids are learning from a very young age about technology, they're making huge strides as they grow up, prepared for schooling, their careers in innovation, etc., etc. But your kids may even be able to help you search for anything online, right? However, with all this constant immersion of technology, there are some very, very real, deep-rooted concerns about how this technology impacts childhood development as well as invades privacy. So we are wandering into a very unknown territory as generations past have never had the same kind of constant technological immersion. But experts are starting to see what technology at this level can do to children and their future. So we are here with three amazing experts. Dr. Isabel Beaulieu, who is a fully licensed psychologist in the state of Michigan, who's formerly trained as a clinical neuropsychologist, Oakland Neuropsychology Center. Dr. Daniel Klein, who's the founder and the managing director of the Child and Family Solutions Center. He is a fully licensed psychologist specializing in children, adolescents, and families. Dr. Preeti Venkatraman, who is a child and adolescent psychiatry specialist and who's also a board member of My Family Services. Let's start off with a little nugget from all three of them before we jump into some questions and have an interactive discussion. We'll start with Dr. Isabel.
Hello, hi everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I think the topic is very on point. It's very relevant. It's something we talk about to our patients, clients all the time. And what I do, I'm specifically a pediatric neuropsychologist, and so I've been working for over 20 years in this field. Basically, my specialty is to do assessments, and so I see kids from ages 4 and up to young adults, and we look at assessing for learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, depression, anxiety, all sorts of difficulties that are interfering with the child's ability to function at school or at home. And so we do myself and my colleagues do the assessment piece, and then we work really hard with the families on putting together a plan to help them at home and at school, what would benefit them given their strengths and weaknesses, because we all have those, given their specific profiles, how to help them the best.
Dan?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Dan Klein. I am a child psychologist. I'm the managing director of the Child and Family Solutions Center, which is a counseling center with offices in Farmington Hills and Bingham Farms. And we specialize in working with children, adolescents, adults, families. We work with children and adolescents who are challenged, having emotional challenges, adjustment difficulties, behavioral issues, and just some of the day-to-day stressors that we're all living through right now, and raising kids and the stressors that kids are going through right now. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is such a relevant topic. I can speak not only as a child psychologist, but the parent of 2 teenagers at home. And the issues that we're going to talk about this afternoon are ones that I not only see on a weekly basis in my office, but are ones that I see in my home on a day-to-day basis, and the same conversations that many of you on this webinar are probably contending with each day. So I'm excited to talk with you and to listen. And these are very complex topics. And as was mentioned, these are topics that were not necessarily pondered or needed to be pondered by generations before us. And yet they're ones that are front and center now. And we're all trying to work together and figure out the best way to parent healthy children.
Thank you. And Preeti?
Hi, I'm Preeti Venkatraman, and I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm board certified in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry. And I have a private practice in Bloomfield Hills. I'm on the board of My Family Services and run an inpatient adolescent unit. And, you know, this has become a big part of working with kids and understanding what a family's culture is about technology, understanding what a child's culture is, and then matching it up developmentally with where that child is. And that's kind of the best way I think we can help, you know, just like you wouldn't send your 6-year-old to the corner grocery store at 10 o'clock at night to get a bottle of milk, the same way you don't send your 6-year-old on the internet unsupervised. And I think if we start young and build it up, we can make a lot of difference and raise, you know, internet savvy children who are also internet smart.
Thank you, Preeti, and thank you to all 3 of you for being here, giving your valuable time, because as you all mentioned, this is a very, very critical topic because we're seeing a lot going on around us. So I'm going to jump right into my first question for you, and we'll probably go in the order of the way you got introduced. So Isabel, Dan, and Preeti, I'd like all 3 of you to weigh in on this question. Is, as psychologists, right, what do you see as the main triggers that lead to lack of concentration, or aches and pains, attention deficit, dizziness, leading to negatively impacting the kids' performance? So I know a lot can be said, but it's just that, what are the core triggers that you see coming to you, or that you have actually sensed, especially with some of the folks that you're dealing with?
Well, that's a very vast question in the sense that there's there can be a lot of different triggers for why we see different kids. And I think that, you know, we have to look at the child in a lot, you know, all the systems that are involved. And so, you know, we think of things like what's going on at home, what are the stressors that are there, what's going on at school, are they in school, how's that going, are they, you know, one of the areas I'm very interested in is sleep. You know, are they sleeping well? Are they eating well? Are they going outside? Or do they have opportunities for physical activity? All of these things, socializing, affect their daily development. And when we see a kid that's struggling, we have to look at all of these different areas to try and understand what's going on and help them.
Dan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's, as Dr. Bilyeu said, this is a vast question, but some of the things that I think about is we live in a day and age of instant gratification. We are raising kids in an age where they're not really learning how to tolerate boredom, that they instantly get on their phone. There's all sorts of different ways to entertain themselves, so which is not allowing for more creativity and learning how to tolerate situations that might be more anxiety provoking because they're immersed in their technology. So we're in an age where we're just overwhelmed with information at all different angles and levels. So there's a lot of things that are pulling for our attention. And we can't separate kids without parents. We're living in a world where we're very distracted all the time by the messages that we're hearing, by the anxiety and stress where we may be feeling in work and raising kids and living through a pandemic. There's so much pulling at us And those things go together because the kids are going to learn from what's modeled, and they're going to learn from what their support systems are like. So as we have these discussions about technology and children and teens, it's really important to contextualize that with parents as well, and that we're all living through this and it all impacts our attention. The two go hand in hand.
Preeti?
Well, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I look at the physical, cognitive, and social and emotional development and functioning of a kid. And as both Dan and Isabel pointed out, what's happening at home, what's happening at school, what's happening in peer relationships, what's happening in the neighborhood, and then what's happening on the internet, all of those come together to help us understand. Like Isabel said, sleep is so important. If, we know that with inadequate sleep, there's actually two ways that it impacts development of and functioning of the brain. One is by actually decreasing melatonin levels, in the body, and therefore causing problems. And the other way is, the blue screens activate the different parts of the brain, so you can't go to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's also been studies that have showed increased cholesterol, increased glucose, not direct correlations, but associations between too much sitting down and screen time and this. Also, the need, some of what you see as somebody being hyper is because they're not getting enough physical exercise. Interestingly, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been practicing for about 25 years now. And in the last 5 to 6 years, we're beginning to see schools where they're actually putting the recess back. 10 years ago, they were taking recess out and saying, oh, no, we're going to use that for academic time.
Right. And it's interesting that you took recess time, because this is something that I keep doing with my son too. I keep asking him, how much of recess time do you have? And he says 10 minutes. What do you guys do with that recess time? Well, we check, we send memes to each other. And I'm like, what? Why are you on devices? I mean, that really is mind boggling. I also read a recent study where, the teenagers, the number of texts that they send in a month, it's thousands and thousands,
tens of thousands,
and thousands. And also 31% of teenagers stayed up to about, I think they stayed awake until about 2 a.m. To just look at information and exchange information. And that number is kind of it's growing, and it's really worrisome. But
forget the teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Me, who's very far away from being a teenager, have found myself at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night looking something up, and that leads me to look something else up, which leads me to look something, and then before you know it, it is 2 o'clock in the morning. So really, we have to start with ourselves and say, okay, so put the same kind of limits on us that we do on the kids.
Right.
Very easy to fall into those rabbit holes.
Right.
So really, one of the things is no technology in the bedroom, no technology half an hour before bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
All technology is charged in the parents' bedroom if they take it from the kitchen or the family room or wherever.
And I think I would add to what Dr. Venkataraman said, because it's absolutely true, that, it has to start with the parents, because especially with teenagers, if you tell them, you cannot have your phone in your room an hour before bed, and then you're not doing that yourself. That hypocrisy, the teenagers will pick up on that right away, and they'll say, well, you don't even do it. So it's really important to lead by example, and it has to be a family rule. That's really important. The other thing is, for what I've been, even with my own kids, and they use their bedrooms and their beds as their office. And so everything happens there. They're on their phone there. They do their homework there. They watch Netflix in their bed. So the bed becomes associated with activities, not with sleep, which is really important how the brain functions. And so what happens is that, okay, now it's time to sleep. They lay down, they're not falling asleep. Because that becomes an area where the brain is not thinking it's supposed to fall asleep when it's in this place in the bed. And so one thing to, you can suggest is to tell your teenagers or your kids, do your homework on the floor, at the desk, somewhere else, on another bed in the house, if a guest room or something, if you can, but not in your bed. Your bed is just for sleep.
Right.
And that makes a big difference.
Right. So much information is being consumed instantly, as Dan had mentioned. It's that instant gratification, that's kind of permeated in every aspect of our life. But as parents, how do we curb or balance this to provide a healthier outcome? Because information is very key. It's relevant, right? We need that information in the contemporary world, and kids oftentimes have that fear of missing out, that FOMO effect, where oh, I'm not caught up. I have things to do, and they're also using their computers for research, because majority of their schoolwork is on the computer. So how do you think we could curb or balance? What are some of the tips or some of the things that you think we could possibly do as parents or grandparents when we see children out there?
Yeah, I think it's the discussion. It starts with the family. And one tool that I've used over the years, I'm going to put it in the chat box in a moment, is creating a family technology or media plan and having that discussion. Because kids have their own, their devices, their connection to their friends. They're using it for learning. They're using it for entertainment. They've become central to kids being, for in some ways good, but for better and for worse. And so it starts with a discussion. It starts with this discussion of what a family values are around technology, about how we can do this in moderation, about creating spaces where there's not going to be technology, emphasizing the importance, as was discussed, of sleep and good eating and good health and exercise, and making sure that we're setting expectations for our kids, that they're involved in extracurriculars and athletics, or following different opportunities in school. But I think all those things are really critical. And when from a psychologist standpoint, as a therapist, particularly with teenagers, it's very hard to come in heavy-handed and say, you can't do this, particularly when we're on our phones. I've found myself numerous occasions saying to my kids, you need to put down your phones while I'm on my phone. What kind of message am I sending there? And they're going to call me right out on that. So it starts with having those discussions. And in terms of instilling those values, as we talked earlier about younger kids and how they're on technology sometimes at 2-3 years old, it's studying those conditions early and in those values, and then bringing it right along developmentally and making them more and more a part of that discussion. And it doesn't mean they're going to listen to everything we say, and we have to set our boundaries and our limits with kids as parents. So these are our expectations, and hear what their expectations are, and land on a place that we can work on together and are really healthy for our family. I'm going to put that in the chat box too, as well. So that's up there.
Thank you.
And to add to that, I think, I was reading up a little bit. There's a researcher called Dana Boyd who's done a lot about kids, teenagers, and social media. And she's actually published on that, in case anybody wants to read her books. But, she said it's not as much a fear of missing out as it is a fear of missing out on it's not that they're addicted to their devices, they're addicted to each other. That's the thing. They want to know what everybody's doing. They want to stay connected. That's a big part of the teenage years. It's kind of a job that they have, right? Is to kind of find where they fit with who's their tribe, who are their friends, who's not. And so a lot of it is just fear of missing out on what's going on with their peer group. And so there needs to be a time in their day where they can actually do that. And if we have kids that go to school all day, then they leave, they go to music, they go to sport, they're overscheduled, they don't have that time to socialize with their peers, which is so important. So the moment they have time, they're right there on their devices looking at who's doing what, who's posted what. And there needs to be a time where they can actually do that. They need to feel, connected as well to their peers. And so I think that having a balance is important. And that's something I've seen, which is a problem, is kids that are just overscheduled between activities. They're volunteering, they're doing this, they just have so much going on.
Preeti, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I
that?
would say, you know, kind of following up on what both Dan and Isabel said, I think in the family, you know, you have to have a set of technology rules, right? And then be able to be a little bit flexible in applying them to different members of the family, right? And based on age and development and need. Okay, so I think that's important. And then to what Isabel was saying, something that I always did with my kids when they were growing up that I think is really important is I limited them to 2 activities every semester. Because if they are in too many activities, there isn't enough downtime, there isn't time to rest, there isn't time, you know, sometimes it's good for kids to be bored a little bit too. You need to be able to be bored and handle boredom because it's part of life.
So let's get to the question. I know we had discussed this before, but for the benefit of the of parents who are here and for people who are going to watch this, screen time. So when it comes to screen time, is there a bad good to it? How much is too much? How does it affect the family dynamics, especially as all 3 of you have raised a very important point of where children are seeing parents on their devices and they mimic that experience into their world. And so how does it affect the family dynamics today? And you know, if you're able to share something that which we as parents or kids could healthily incorporate in our daily routines, that would be great too. So I know you've shared a couple of those, but I just wanted to see, you know, is there some kind of like a limit of sorts, you know, hey, X amount of hours per day or things like that? So we'll start off with one of you, Isabel, Dan.
Okay,
or Preeti.
I don't think that there is if people want specific guidelines, the American Pediatric Association has those on their website if you look them up. But I think in my experience, it's been more, it's kind of a case by case. And some children, you know, they kind of manage it well. They don't really need you have your device for 2 hours a day or 1 hour. Some days they barely go on their device because they're playing with their friends or there's exciting things going on in the family or they're doing activities. And some others, if they do not have, you know, their iPad or their device in their hands, it's a big issue. I think if you have children who, or teenagers that have some mental health issues, I think I would be a little bit more careful as to how much time they spend or monitor how, you know, what they're doing a little bit more on the, you know, on their devices. So I think it's really a case per case. That's been my experience. I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Yeah, I would agree as well. You know, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out years ago and they were saying 2 hours for certain age groups, and anyone as a parent that's it's very hard to enforce. And also it's a more complex issue because of the different things that kids are doing on their devices. So as we were discussing before, it's important to have other outlets in addition to technology. When we pull away the technology from a teenager, from a child, the question is then what? And if they haven't learned how to entertain themselves and they're not interacting with mom or dad or their siblings, and particularly in the context of the pandemic we're living through, that's really hard. So we have to make sure if we're going to pull it away and put limits, there's something left there to kind of help them, to support them, and to give them that structure that we all crave for, and particularly kids crave for. Yeah, I read something as I was preparing for this that an average teenager is spending about 9 hours of waking hours a day on their devices, which is about 52% of their waking hours and more. And so looking at that doesn't, you know, sound real healthy. But then we break that down. We say, what are they doing on there? Is it social engagement? Is it that they're gaming? Is it that they're using it for learning? Is it that they're using it for school? So I think we have to look at all those different pieces. And one more thought that I had read in a book, he kind of divided using screen time between what's creative and what's vegetative. And so there's different things we can be doing. If there's things that are encouraging learning and encouraging creativity, those might lend us to having a little bit more time. If it's just that we're watching TikTok videos or other things that may not be so healthy and exposing our kids to areas that maybe are not appropriate, we need to be mindful of those as well.
No, I agree with Dan, and to kind of segue into that a little bit further, I had started off earlier talking about the physical, the cognitive, and the emotional effects, right? And we all know, we all focus on the negative, but there's positives too. Like video games help with, psychomotor engagement, right? You're able to consolidate information coming from different stimuli and come up with an outcome, right? It also helps with metacognition. It also helps with self-esteem and social engagement, and the role-playing fantasy games, that is imaginative play. And children need imaginative play as toddlers, as school-age kids, as high schoolers, and as young adults. Mm-hmm. And so there can be very positive outcomes of that. But like Isabel said, you have to know your child and understand if your child has like a 15-year-old who's going on the internet and asking questions about themselves and looking for, reinforcement because they're depressed and they're looking for somebody to make them feel happy, is going to come away very unhappy because eventually their peers get tired of propping them up and say, just get off the site, right? Whereas someone who's emotionally healthy and more neurotypical will engage in a more healthy neurotypical way.
Great. So before we go to the to another question, I just wanted to throw it open to the attendees. If you have any questions, please throw them into the chat box, and we're going to moderate those questions and check to see if we could address some of those. So please do so. You can go to the chat and add your questions. So Preeti, since you're on screen, let me just take a little just a few seconds of your time with regard to this question about medical issues coming with regard to the posture, right? Because I know I'm married to a therapist, and he keeps telling me, my husband keeps telling me that there is an increased number of cases that he's been seeing from the therapeutic side of the field, where the posture of children is wrong because they're constantly looking down to the device. They're constantly on their computers, which kind of creates issues which are medically also, pretty worrisome. So do you have anything to say with regard to outside of just the posture aspect of it? I do know that there are a lot of other medical conditions that you would see, right, that are associated with advanced technology or spending more time on screen.
Well, like with anything, a balance, right? You balance of physical activity and station, and even role-playing games or, doing research on the internet. If you do it for 12 hours a day, yeah, you're going to have problems. So therefore, again, the whole idea of balance and a family culture, right? You need a family culture where there's a culture of being active together, playing board games, as well as playing internet games. Like my daughter and her boyfriend and my son and his wife, now they just got married. My son lives and his wife live in England. They live here in Michigan. My daughter and her boyfriend, they play games, like they play Scrabble, they play different games on the internet together. So they socialize together.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a lot of good things you can do.
Right. So let me go back to all of you in terms of the pandemic. Of course, I'm using this cliched word of the pandemic, COVID. Lack of social interaction in person has thrown kids just out of the blue, right? Falling behind on physical, social, emotional milestones. You hardly you see a little changing aspect of their behaviors, especially because lack of social interaction. So how do we handle this? I understand that you have asked for more family time and things like that, but what do you see, has anything changed because of COVID or because of the pandemic in terms of the number of children visiting you or parents bringing their children to you? I just wanted to go over all three of you and see how your work load has changed owing to the pandemic.
We are living through a mental health pandemic as well, and you may be reading about it or hearing about it in the news, and we're living that every day as mental health professionals. we see the images on TV of the emergency rooms and how packed and overwhelmed they are. Well, you don't see those images in mental health offices, in part because we're in telehealth, but our phones don't stop ringing. The number of children, teens in need have just increased exponentially over the last 18 months, and they were on the rise even prior to the pandemic. So it's something that's really critical that we pay attention to, the parents, professionals that we're talking about, and keeping an eye on our kids, checking in with them, because we're all living through an extremely stressful time that none of us have experienced before. Our kids are living with the unknown if they'll be back in school the next day, if mom and dad or themselves might be sick, where we have kind of threatening messages all around us that there's this disease that around us that we might get sick from. It's a very tough time, not to mention the other stressors that we're hearing about, the tragedy in Oxford, or social challenges that our nation's been facing. So it's a very difficult time for children, teens, and families to go through, and we're seeing that each and every day. On a positive, I'll just add that we're seeing more and more people reach out for help. And I think one of the silver linings here is the idea of getting help for mental health has been destigmatized. We're seeing more and more people talking openly about it. We see families that are just concerned about their kids that might have been hesitant to call a mental health office because they're worried about the stigma, and are recognizing that as just a better part of holistic care of their child. So people are reaching out for help, but it's as providers, we're struggling to keep up with demand, and we're doing everything that we can to do our part, but it's a tough time.
Yeah, go ahead, Isabel.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with Dr. Klein. I think that's been my experience as well, that the demand in assistance, mental health help has really skyrocketed, and it's hard for us to kind of keep on top of all of this and help as many families as we can. What I've observed as a neuropsychologist is, I think my biggest concern when this all started with COVID and online learning is I was really concerned about social development, and especially in young kids. And so I think that the research is not completed. I mean, they're just starting to look at that. So we'll have to see, what it's really had as far as an effect. What I've been able to observe is that in the younger kids, I'm seeing more kids that are a little bit behind with reading and writing and math. And is it because they kind of had a year of online learning? It's really hard to teach kindergarten, first, second graders basic academic skills, or is it because they have an underlying learning disability, and now we're starting to see it? So I've been seeing a lot of these types of cases and helping figure out what is what. Also, some kids have missed out, the younger kids, on the social learning that goes with going to school. Like, how are you supposed to behave? How do you play with others? You're supposed to, follow rules and directions from your teacher. They haven't had that year. And so they're a little bit behind with kind of knowing how to do school a little bit. And so that's something I've observed as well. And then I've seen some kids who socially have kind of fallen off the radar, and they have no more friends because they were pretty much isolated and quarantining for a long time. And they're starting to rebuild, friendships. Old friends are no longer there for them. They've moved on. So that's been stressful. There has been a group, though, of kids that have really kind of adjusted very well to the quarantine, and they feel like not going to school really helped reduce their anxiety, their social anxiety. If they were bullied, that stopped. If school was too fast paced, they could take their time and really learn the concept. And there is a subgroup of kids that actually it's really been helpful to them.
Oh, I know you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, do you want to add anything, Preeti?
Yeah, I do actually. I think, to kind of taking off on what Isabel said, if you think about it, this has affected each type of kid differently. So your kids who were doing well and who are like heading to, college have actually had more problems than some of our kids who've had problems before, because they are just in total, their brains in chaos. They're like, oh my God, I can't get my service projects done. I can't get my exams done. I can't, what's going to happen to my grades? Then you have the kids, like Isabel said, who have social anxiety and were bullied, they are doing better with this. But that's also a problem. And some of the kids, I've had patients who don't want to go back after being online for a year. Not that they did well online, but like you said, they don't have a group of friends anymore. And they're afraid to go back to school. And they're afraid to not have a group to sit with at lunch. So that's an issue.
Right. So I'd like to take one question from the attendees. I think it's from Danya. We hear of many different types of mental disorders in the last few years. As parents, what are some of the warning signs we need to look at in our kids before it gets too late?
I could start on that one. I think the first thing to watch for is a change in personality. Mm-hmm. If your kid is usually someone who comes home, talks to you about what's happened during his day or her day, and starts withdrawing from that. If you see grades falling, mm-hmm. if you see the child not being interested in engaging with friends, if you see withdrawal from activities they enjoyed, mm-hmm. then, you know, and what I tell parents is don't offer the idea of talking to someone or seeing a therapist or seeing a psychiatrist. Say, we are going to go do this. Because a lot of times giving them the option they see as giving them an out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Isabel or Dan, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think that's why it's so important that we're checking in with our kids. And sometimes checking in is asking how they're doing. Sometimes checking in is playing a game with them, and some of the conversation is going to come naturally as well. You know, we have talked about some of the indicators that we look at when there's a change in a child. Irritability of mood sometimes as well, if they're acting in ways that you're not accustomed to. And it's always permissible, if you are concerned as a parent and you're not sure, to call your pediatrician and talk with them, run it by them. There's no harm in doing that. Sometimes they're just having a bad day or two, or sometimes these things are an indicator that there is something under the surface that we want to attend to on the sooner side. So particularly because it's so hard to separate the times we're living in from, as Isabel was talking about, even with diagnosing learning disabilities. Right. Sure, there's no harm in calling your pediatrician, calling a mental health professional. Hey, what do you think about this? Sometimes it might come in once, sometimes there's indication. And Preeti is right as well to just say, if it is a decision that you make to take them to a professional, we're going to talk with this person and not put in such a choice. Because kids often don't understand what that is. A lot of people don't understand what it's like to go see a psychologist, and part of our role when we first meet with someone is demystify that process. And it's really sitting and talking, having games, you know, with kids, and creating a space where they can express themselves and feel supported and feel understood.
Mm-hmm. Isabel?
Yeah, I think my colleagues are absolutely right. I think that, you know, they really talked about those warning signs to look for. Maybe a couple I would add is any changes in sleep patterns and eating patterns are important. Mm-hmm. If you see your child is, you know, I'll see some teenagers where they're completely flipped with their day and night. They're mm-hmm. up all night, they're sleeping during the day. That's a big red flag. Mm-hmm. Or kid that's really losing weight when they're not supposed to be losing weight, or gaining a lot of weight. That's a concern. One of the mental illnesses that have had kind of a big kind of surge over a pandemic is eating disorders. And that I think is partly due to social media. That's another, I think, you know, some other little red flags to look for.
And I think, you know, mentioning eating disorders, I'm glad you brought that up, Isabel. Boys have eating disorders too, and the numbers of boys with eating disorders is exponentially rising with access to media. And it's interesting, girls focus on their stomachs and their thighs being thin. Boys focus on their pec muscles and their back muscles and that V-shaped torso. And it really is, and it's a little bit harder to, and they may first show up with anxiety, or they may first show up with depression, but that's sometimes the underlying issue.
So we'll just take a few seconds, or probably a minute. We're going to launch a poll. So please, all the attendees, would like you to just take the poll and answer these questions. And we would definitely love to hear more questions from you if you want to post those in the chat box. But we'll just take this quick poll and then come back to our discussion. All right.
You can continue the discussion.
right.
Till the
Thank
polls are
you.
going on.
Thank you. So let's talk about, I think I see another question. Not sure if this was mentioned, but make sure there are parental controls on their phones and be sure to have an open dialogue with both sending the same message. Is that a question, or do you have a question, Rani? If you could just post your question. But I would like to continue this discussion with regard to I'm going into the psychological side of the of children, and let's take a quick look at the poll results. Before we go into our next? Oh, I think I just lost it. But anyways, yeah. Do you have school-going children, grandchildren? I think 83% of you have said yes. And how much time does your child spend? I think 50% of you have said over 20 plus hours per week. Well, that's kind of something that we have seen. And does your child have conversations about social media posts that they have received or shared? 67% of them have said yes, but 33% have said no. Do you have any parental controls? Well, it's 50-50. And do you have easy access to trustworthy child resources and psychologists when you need one? It's again 50-50 in terms of that. So thank you. Thanks for taking this poll, and I think we're just going to use this to do some of our informational webinars. So, okay, all right. So let's go to this the psychological aspect of it, because when we just saw that a lot of parents here have also said that kids are spending over 20 hours a week, you know, apart, I mean, you know, which does not include school time, I'm guessing. So
do we know that for sure, though? Do we know
yes.
that's outside of just school time or homework time?
I'm guessing that, because I think if you calculate that, then it's going to be far higher, because 7 hours or 8 hours goes per day at school. So I'm guessing that technically that's what they're aware of, that it's over 20 hours. But but it is growing, right? Numbers are growing. So when you look at the psychological perspective of a child, how do you think, or what do you think, where do you think they should draw that line between that real world versus that virtual world where they're doing all of this stuff? Because they get the attention, they're seeking that attention, which they might get, they might not get. They are playing a lot of games where there's role playing, as you mentioned, where they are taking other, you know, character names, and they are sharing memes and things like that. So where do you think that real virtual world, you know, kind of, where do you think they should draw that line, or is there even a line that needs to be drawn between the two worlds?
Are you referencing here like playing online games versus
playing online games, having different social personas, because they are not going in with their real names because of out of fear that, you know, they do understand that there is a privacy concern. They assume a different avatar altogether. And so I'm kind of looking at that aspect of, because it's a virtual world and they are experiencing a different kind of a virtual world, and they sometimes mimic that to the real world. They don't often do it's not the other way around. It's the, you know, the virtual to the real. So I'm just trying to see, what are the things that we can possibly do to make them aware or inform or keep them, you know, what kind of discussions we could probably have as parents with children when it comes to that kind of a thing?
Well, I think anytime that the virtual overtakes your real world, there's a problem. And again, sort of like what we were talking about earlier about mental illness and concerns about signs. So if they are not doing their homework, if their grades are falling and all they're focusing on are the games, right? Or their different websites that they're on. If they are, like I had a young lady who at 17 got involved with a group of people online. And she went from like a straight A student to failing all her classes, you know, following her parents' rules, to not listening to them, and to talking about these people as her family. That's a sign that this is a problem, right?
Right.
So again, going back to monitoring, really need to think of, you know, internet with training wheels, and then you take the training wheels off, and then you do monitoring, and then, you know, you let them be on their own. So you have to, at different ages, start and build it up. And as soon as you see a problem, like with anything else, pull back.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that teachers play an important role in this? Because most of the children are spending time at school, right?
Well, you know, that's interesting you bring that up, Anu, because I just did an evaluation for a couple of kids in one of the Oakland County schools. And, you know, all schools have intra-school, intra-district systems, right? Messaging systems that the kids use. And there were 2 kids who were sending inappropriate messages and violent messages to each other and other people in the school's network. And when I was talking to the principal, what he said to me was that this is something parents think we can monitor a lot more closely, but we can't. We need these systems because this is how they do their schoolwork, but they can use the chat for inappropriate stuff too. And even if our technology, you know, department monitored everything closely, we couldn't catch all of this.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably one of the things that they've put in place to help with that is that they have okay to say kind of portal where you can anonymously, the kids can report things like that that are happening. And I think they do rely not only on teachers, but on the other students to kind of bring that up if that happens, because they're the ones who see it. And they're the ones who are able to flag these issues to their counselors and principal. And I think that that's really key. And, you know, I think that research has shown that what happens socially in real life is what happens in social media. So if you're struggling in real life with your social connections and you're doing inappropriate things, it tends to it'll happen in your social media. And so a lot of time these kids will, the staff is not surprised because they know that these kids are struggling socially to connect, or they're doing it inappropriately. And so again, it's all a question of parents monitoring. And then I think we also have to rely up to a certain point on their peers for certain things.
I would just add that one other concern, and there's many as we get into social media and virtual worlds, is the impact that it's having on empathy and with our kids, that when we go into this virtual world, there is still another person on the side of that. We may not know who that person is, which is a danger in and of itself. But when we see the cyberbullying going on and the gaslighting, and where kids feel enabled and emboldened to act in ways that they probably wouldn't act if they were face to face with that child, that their empathy would kick in through that one-on-one, looking that person in the eye. It's depersonalized things, and it's made it very difficult on kids and victims of bullying. And it's something that we as parents have to think a lot about, how we continue to instill empathy. And on the other side of this is as another human being, another person, no matter what kind of avatar or persona they're taking on.
And I think adding to the idea of cyberbullying is cyber exclusion.
Yep.
because there's a slumber party at somebody's house and all of the girls are sent the message and one isn't, or it's posted on these number of people's Facebook, but others in the group are excluded, then that leads to problems.
Absolutely.
Now, when you look at My Family Services, right, and we are working with individuals and families where the ecosystem is kind of broken owing to violent households, and owing to that, children in those households are also relying on technology because of the fact that they're not getting attention because of the of the two individuals in the family fighting or creating a much more violent environment and then the child goes into seeking attention to different tools. So when there is no attention being forced or or placed on the child, then the child seeks other places where he or she is getting attention. So have you ever received any kind of cases or children from violent households where it's been very tricky and complex for you to handle because of the fact that there's a far bigger issue in place in hand that needs to be handled before you even touch this aspect of technology?
That's a very real thing in child psychology and psychiatry, that the child is the perceived patient, but the pathology is happening in the family. Mm-hmm. You cannot treat a child outside, or an adolescent, or mm-hmm. sometimes even a young adult, outside of the entire system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have a question here. They're saying that should the school system and social media be reevaluated when it comes to technology regulations or controls?
Yeah, I think a lot needs to be reevaluated. And in a positive front, I just read this past week that the state of Michigan is using some money they got from the federal government to place about 300 mental health therapists. We're going to hire and put them in schools. Over the last probably 15, 20 years, we've had budget cuts and situations within our state, even nationally. The support for mental health has been one of the first things to go. And that's and we're seeing the impact of that now, as that at the same time we live in an age of more anxiety and more stress on children, teens, and families for all the reasons we've been talking about here today. So my own opinion is, yeah, that needs to be reevaluated. We need to have more supports in place. It shouldn't take a school shooting or a pandemic to sound the alarms, but if that's what's happened and if anything good can come out of it, then that's the right direction we need to move into. And certainly the fear that any parent has about something happening to one of their kids and becoming suicidal, that is why it's so important that we're constantly attuned to our kids. We're checking in, we're looking for some of the signs and symptoms that we talked about earlier today. We're talking with other professionals if we have any concerns whatsoever that we just don't feel comfortable with. But having those lines of communication are really key. And in most cases, when those lines of communication are there between children and parents, we can prevent the situations that we all fear happening.
All right, so we're kind of nearing an hour, and so I will take some last pieces of advice or or your expertise, expert comments in terms of for the parents and for the kids. So we'll start with Isabel.
I think my final thoughts are basically that, social media is here to stay. It's not going away. We have to keep learning about it and watching our kids and how they're interacting with that. Just keep the communication channels open all the time with your children. Ask them what they're doing. Show interest in what they do online as well. And just stay away from criticizing and just, talking more about what's going on and how to maintain a good balance in life.
My final thoughts would be that in terms of technology, these are complex, difficult challenges that families are going through each and every day. There's no easy answers. It's not all bad or all good. There's positives that have come out of technology, and we're learning a lot. But we have to trust our instincts and beyond technology, going back, making sure we're paying attention to the basics of raising a family, which is spending one-on-one with your child, thinking about how we're modeling for our kids and what behavior we're showing them, making sure we're present to celebrate the successes, to help them with coping strategies when they're having a hard time, and to working together as a community, making sure that we're accessing necessary resources when we're in situations that we're uncomfortable with or concerned about our child. And I think if we take all those steps together, we can move in a positive direction.
I would agree with both of my colleagues, and I would add to that is monitor not just for external stress, but internal stress. You know, so many of our kids have internal stress that's placed on them by all of us, right? That we don't even do on purpose, it's inadvertently, right? And because I've had kids say to me, well, you know, I have to get all A's. No one has to get all A's. And learning to fail is also a lesson we need to learn. That internal stress is the kind of stuff that leads to these kids you hear who are like straight A students, got into their school, the college they wanted to, but committed suicide, you know? So we don't want that. And that comes from internal stress. But technology, like Dan and Isabel said, is here to stay. And we need to partner our children. We need to, you know, model for them and partner with them to get them to a place where they are savvy technology users. You're muted.
I am again. So thank you, Dan, for the excellent resource for teens and families. That's Slaying Digital Dragons by Alex Packer. So thank you.
Book that came out this past year, and highly recommend it.
Okay.
We're struggling.
I'm glad that we handled all the questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Isabel, Dr. Dan, Dr. Preeti. I mean, all three of you have gone above and beyond in terms of spending your time today, this afternoon with us. As we leave, I just want to let all of you know that children and teenagers around the country are cutting down on their media consumption. It's not going to happen. And this has continued to only get more intense over time as more apps, more options arise because of to distract kids. So while many people see the negative impact of such technology usage, there are also pros, as all three psychologists have mentioned. But the real question is that when parents and teachers, when they harness technology in useful ways, then there is a lot more positive impact that kids can actually get out of this. So spend more time with each other, make it fun, keep your conversations going with your kids. Sometimes you have to become a kid to handle one. So stay happy, stay blessed, and I'd like all of you, all three of you, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for all the attendees. Thanks for spending an hour of your beautiful weekend with us. And for all those of you who want to learn more about My Family Services, we are at www.maifs.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.